Welcome to another episode of the Information Addicts podcast. My name's Cassidy. I'm an information addict, and this is my podcast where I explore information, ideas, and beliefs and try to do those things more responsibly. Today, I have my friend Shelly on. I met her from the Bridges of Meaning Discord. I met Shelly on the Discord probably 8 to 6 months ago. She's been so much fun to get to know, and I asked her to come on and talk with me about her experience with missions, and I had so much fun exploring that with her and kind of talking about sort of misconceptions about what that is and how do we approach that topic better. So without further ado, here is Shelly. Awesome. Well, Shelly, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Hi, thanks for being here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we get started, I'd love you to just kind of give a brief introduction of who you are, give yourself a little bit of backgrounds, and we're going to be talking about missions today. So definitely talk about why that topic is really important to you and resonates with you.
Yeah. I've been, that's been my vocation. I've been working as a missionary for about a decade. So crazy. I've been working in West Africa, helping with the Bible translation, project. Spending, the lion's share of the last 8 years living there, working with it's a Muslim people group without a written language and working on developing an alphabet and translating the Bible into that text. So that's,
Yeah. What got you interested in that?
I always was, I've been a Christian all my life and grew up in the non-denominational church background, Christian church. And missions was always something that interested me and excited me and compelled me. Around junior, senior year of high school, I decided to do nursing. So I actually finished nursing school. And while in nursing school, I took this course called Perspectives on the World Christian Movement. And that kind of just reignited my fire for missions as a lifestyle, as a choice for me.
Right.
So I worked for about a year as a nurse, and then went to my organization. I've been with an organization called Pioneer Bible Translators, and I started training with them to decide, in what capacity I wanted to be a part of missions.
Yeah, it's so funny because you got your degree in nursing, but you decided to go into Bible translation. A lot of people would think you'd be like, oh, let's go do the health thing.
Nursing missions, yeah. Well, and part of it was I'm glad the way things turned out the way they did, but part of the nursing decision in general goes against the grain of who I am a little bit. Maybe I'll work as a nurse again, but I was already I don't know about this nursing business.
Yeah.
And Bible translation just really got a hold of me through different people, and this idea of, every language having the word of God in their language.
Right.
This idea of a choice. I think a lot of secular America thinks of missionaries as some kind of forcing this. And my thing was just everybody should have a choice,
Right.
So that's where I went with Bible translation.
Well, and it's crazy to realize how important it is to have the Bible in your own language. One of my family friends, she's from Romania, and she used to read the Bible in English, and she finally got her hands on a translation in Romanian and was like, wow, it's such a difference.
Yes.
That's a huge thing.
Yeah, those are my favorite stories. And, I've heard a lot of them being in a translation organization of people reading, especially those key texts, John 3:16, for the first time. I remember I bought a Bible off Amazon for my friend from, I want to say Pakistan, but I think so. And I asked him what his mother tongue was, and he told me, and I searched out a Bible, and got him one. We weren't even that good friends, but I remember he's like, I know that verse, John 3:16. He's like, everybody says it. I see it on signs, and I don't really get why it's such a big deal. I mean, he knew the English, like, but
Right.
then he read it in his own language, and he's like, huh, okay. And it wasn't like I want to become Christian now. It was just like, I think registering on a deeper heart level, um, that thing about a mother tongue, like the language you dream in, the language you count in, the language you fight in, the language your mom talked to you in. It's very deep. It kind of goes beyond words almost, I think. So
Yeah. Well, and it's just so hard. I get caught up with some of the language stuff too, especially because I'm reading I'm reading the Bible from a translation and just realizing maybe I'm missing something from like the original. I
mhm.
started to like it's crazy, but I started to be like have the itch to like learn Hebrew and Greek to kind of really get into like the core of those things. But I don't know if I'll ever do that, but
I was
it's
gonna say,
so
no, you're
tricky.
right. That is crazy. No, but I love it. I'm around people who, again, Bible translation. So a lot of the Bible translators are these super smart people who, yeah, did the Hebrew and the Greek. My teammate used to do, I don't know if he still does, his devotionals every morning in Hebrew.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, yeah,
I
it
love
is.
it.
I
I
do
love
too.
it.
And yeah, I like to surround myself with people that are smarter than me. So
Yeah, me too.
gotta
I
go.
always want to be the dumbest person in the room. That's what I say.
Yep. A little
Well,
intimidating, but definitely more interesting.
for sure, for sure. Well, so you're kind of in an interesting position now because you are transitioning out of that mission field as a job. Can you kind of go
Yeah.
through why that is and how you're feeling about all of that?
Yeah. I can try. I can try. So yeah, I came back to America in April, and COVID was picking up. Well, no, we're kind of in the thick of it at that point. The airport in the West African country I was in had already shut down. I got out on a repatriation flight by the US government.
Okay.
Um, but even then, even though it was actually technically only 3 or 4 weeks before our scheduled home assignment. I say our because I work and live near another American couple, my teammates, and we did a lot of life together. So
Yeah.
our scheduled home assignment was 3 or 4 weeks after when we actually left. So I was already in that mindset of like closing things up and transition. You have to, every time I do it, I feel like I get a little better at it, but just like get your head where your heart is and your heart where your head is. It's a thing, especially if you're a feeler like I am. So I was already in like processing emotion mode. And I do remember looking around being like, this might be the last, I might not be coming back. And a lot of it just has to do with honestly, ready to have a family. And like I had prayed and waited for that to happen on the field because I know women for whom that has happened on the field, and it just hadn't. And I was, yeah, just kind of struggling through it and like not reaching a resolution. Like God wasn't taking away that desire, and I was kind of just feeling this increasing like I don't know if I could,
Yeah.
my teammate was pregnant, and she was like, "You're going to be Aunt Shelly," and I was excited, but it also made me stop and be like, "Okay, am I ready to be uh, just Aunt Shelly forever?"
Yeah.
And so that was honestly the big reasoning. I came home and wasn't ready to say that out loud. Was still kind of processing through it, and had some other trauma and drama in my life
Yeah.
that just kind of how trauma drama kind of shakes everything up in your life, and then
Yeah.
when, when things resettle you realize sometimes something has shifted. And I don't know, for me it was just like still coming to terms with this big decision,
Yeah.
and kind of smack dab in the middle of that, I met someone who I'm now dating. So just a lot of change. Also looking at, or I've just become a catechumen in the Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
So all those things were like interrelated,
Yeah.
and so that's where I am right now.
Yeah. So you say you're a feeler. How are you feeling all about it all right now? Just as you're processing through it all, is there still sort of like a sense of loss walking away from all of that?
I don't think I have started the grieving process yet.
Okay.
I think part of it is this new relationship, and part of it is as far as timing. Like I think my part of me thinks I'm still on home assignment and I'm going to go back soon.
Right.
I think next week we have these meetings as a branch, like all the missionaries in my country. We usually meet in person, but we're doing it by Zoom this year. And they're gonna do a little like goodbye ceremony for me, and that'll probably kickstart the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. I mean, it's just got to be so hard to walk away from something. And I'm sure it
Yeah, I
gave you so
mean,
much life.
yes, and I'm pretty relationally based, so like I do hope to do like a goodbye trip, and say goodbye to my friends in West Africa, but then also, yeah, the missionaries I served alongside, they just kind of become your family. I have never been in the military, but I think it's similar to, your ex-army buddies or whatever. Like you suffered together in a way that when I come back to America, other people don't really understand. And it's not their fault, but it's just you have a special bond.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah, it's as far as how I'm feeling now, I do think that's been a gift because I have felt pretty much overwhelming peace the whole time. It's not like there aren't little blips of highs and lows. And with the stuff I was going through before, it brought me really low, and then I got in this new relationship, brought me really high, and now I'm kind of like reestablishing my baseline.
Yeah.
So because in general I like stability. I actually don't like ups and downs. But um
Yeah.
yeah, so that's how I am right now.
Yeah. So let's unpack it a little bit and kind of talk through some of these things of missions and perceptions of missions versus realities of missions, and
Mhm.
how your perception has changed as you've experienced it through just, researching it and having the idea of it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So when I came on the field or started preparing to go on the field, I feel like my organization does a pretty good job as far as preparation. There's kind of a spectrum. That's part of the problems of missions is such a huge umbrella.
Yeah.
Somebody told me once, he said, "Oh, I was a missionary." And I said, "Oh, okay." He's like, "I did a 2-week trip to New Zealand." And then, so he called himself a missionary. And I was like, okay, okay. Like we are
Yeah.
using this word differently, but okay. So that's part of the, define your terms on the front end deal.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember, this was bigger, I feel like maybe for missionaries, but there was kind of this like little war and missiology as far as like somebody made the statement like everyone's a missionary right where they are or something. And then
Mhm.
people being like, well, now you're just making people confused because most people think of missions as like a cross-cultural experience, something a little bit more deliberate, but it's also true that we should all be missionaries where we are. Yeah, I mean, the word is fudgy, as
Yeah.
PBK likes to say. So,
Yeah. I was just about to say that. It's one of those things.
then,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah. Well, I was just going to say 10 years ago when I was going through training, I think that I did have a lot of just like starry-eyed, idealistic dreams and goals
Hmm.
to change the world for God. And it's like now, as I see new people come on the field, I see that same fervor and zeal. And part of me wants to like burst their bubble and say, like, uh, you're not going to make the difference you think you are. But if someone had done that to me 10 years ago, maybe I wouldn't have come. So it's just been kind of, I feel like, a growing up process for me. And it's good. I feel like I've grown in wisdom and I've grown in humility. I hope, and just and just making the realization that God is working everywhere in the world, and whether or not I'm there, whether or not there's missionaries there, like God is preparing, they're his fields. Like we're workers, they're his fields. And that has brought me more comfort. You can get, I got tied up in this sense of guilt and urgency that if I didn't represent Christianity well to my neighbors in West Africa, that, you know, they were going to be turned off of Jesus forever. And it's just, it's an unrealistic weight to put on a person.
Yeah.
And having said all that, I still am really, you know, passionate about missions. So just maybe a little bit higher resolution view of it, I think.
Yeah. Missions get so, yeah, it is so fudgy. It gets so convoluted because there's all these different things where I think the perception of you're a missionary is that, oh, you're out in Africa and you're, you know,
Right.
you're, you know, helping, you know, the poor, whatever.
Mhm.
But then you've got this whole other branch of Christianity, especially in the evangelical sphere, that I was around for probably 2 years, maybe a year ago, that is this sort of missional living of like you're a missionary in the
Right.
city you're in, and you have these
Right.
campus ministers who are raising support and
Mhm.
you know, going on the college campuses to evangelize, and it's just such a different concept
Yeah.
of missions, and they all have these different impacts. It gets
Yes.
it gets really
Yeah.
interesting.
There's a, I don't know if she has a podcast. She used to have a blog when when blogs were more popular, called Jamie the Very Worst Missionary.
Yeah.
And she was pretty popular. I don't even know where she is now, like faith wise. I felt like, I don't know. But I think they were in maybe Costa Rica or something. And she did a podcast on some popular, maybe like Bad Christian, back when they were um, a podcast. I don't think their podcast anymore. But she was talking about making this point that, yeah, there are missionaries that like live in super nice houses with pools and get support from America and shouldn't be missionaries. She's like, I am not even trying to say that that's not a reality. And that's what I've realized when I've come back to the States. And, you know, a lot of people are, if they have a negative response to, you know, when I say I'm a missionary, I try to, you know, if it's not just like, you know, somebody on the bus or whatever, if we're going to have some kind of relationship, I'm like, so what do you think, what are the thoughts coming to your head when you hear that word? Because maybe we should talk about that first.
Yeah. And what are the
Um,
responses?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is all over the map. Some people have been burned, or, you know, they watched some movie or read some book that portrayed missionaries as these, you know, culture killing colonialists or something like that. And maybe that's the only like personal experience they've had. It's not even a personal experience. It's just like media related. Um, and then it is weird in today's culture. It's very weird that like I take money from friends and family to do my job. Like that's my salary. That's weird in
Yeah.
American culture. That's very weird. And especially like we have a lot of hangups with money in the West. So I think that's a big obstacle for a lot of Christians and non-Christians. This idea of like giving money to someone instead of them earning it.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of, I think it is really, I've never been sad that I've asked that question of like, so what are you thinking about when I say missionary?
Yeah.
You know, just to kind of define terms on the front end.
I think it's so important because it's not like everybody has the same thought about certain words or the ideas of that, and to place that assumption on someone is a horrible way to start a conversation. So letting them describe, okay, this is what I'm feeling, makes it easier to like direct the conversation and
Yeah.
like trying to bridge that understanding.
Well, right. It's humanizing on both ends. Like it's a little dehumanizing to assume that the person I'm talking to is thinking what I'm thinking, and it's a little dehumanizing for me for them to put on this idea that they have onto me.
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. So here's the question that I have, and I've been thinking about it a lot lately, just the impact of missions and the idealistic nature of like we do these short-term missions or even long-term missions with this idealistic perspective that we're helping. But I think a lot of people have been trying to audit that system and kind of get to a place of, is it actually helping? Are we hurting these communities? What are your sort of thoughts on that as you've experienced it?
yeah. It's a huge question. My organization, I really feel like tries to prepare me for basically the this is gonna be like a broad statement, but I feel like within my context, it was definitely true. The more time on the front end you learn language and culture learning, the less likelihood, the less harm you'll do in the long run. Realistically speaking, you will always do some harm. Like that's just human nature. I will never be like an insider of the culture that I worked in. It just won't happen. So I will make cultural gaffes. I'll make mistakes. I'll offend people. Really, the question will be, do they love me and respect me enough to tell me when I've made a mistake? That's kind of the that's really the heart of the issue. And so short-term mission trips that come in, I really do think, there's a book called When Helping Hurts. I can't remember the author, but it's amazing. It's a great book that I read even before going. And so this idea of just realizing that part of with these short-term trips, they're like 2 weeks, 1 week, 1 month, whatever, coming in with the expectation that if I'm going on this trip, like I'm going to be changed and I'm going to be impacted, and less of an expectation of I'm going to save someone in a week or 2 or 3, or like encourage them, or I mean you could encourage them or whatever, but like really it's for the participants of those short-term trips more than the host country. I would say I feel like that's a super realistic expectation.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. So in your perspective, then, are the short-term missions more harmful than they are good?
I think it just depends on what their goals and expectations are setting up. Like, I hear about I think churches are getting getting better and better at it. Like I'm hearing about more churches doing, like a prayer trip, or like just to go visit a missionary that they're supporting and doing like a particular job for the missionary. I mean, I was a part of several trips growing up that were just like bad trips, like we went and built churches in places that the people on the ground could have built the church,
Right.
And spent a whole lot of money. These like ignorant high schoolers, they would tell us what to do and we would do it. And I mean, it's easy to be cynical about it, and I am, but I also know that those trips are part of the reason that I did what I did. So it's difficult to put, like dollars and cents on all these things, but I do think it's worth thinking about. And just that sustainability and reproducibility.
Yeah.
So we had a team come in from a Baptist group to our area in West Africa, and they've adopted the people group, and they come in and they hire a translator and they do Bible storying for like a week or so, and they travel around to different villages.
Yeah.
And I can't even claim to be an authority from my viewpoint. I would see it just better to find a family in your church or somewhere and send them to learn the language and culture, to live there, live among the people and because that's what I see as better, but I also realize I'm not God.
Yeah. What?
So you did not have God on your podcast this morning, Cassidy.
That's the only reason I had you on. I thought you were God.
So I would, I do think that churches are becoming more and more self-aware in planning these short-term trips. And I think that's
Yeah.
really, really good.
Yeah. It's funny. I went on a short-term trip when I was probably 20, 21. And we went to Belize, and we ran like a VBS for kids for a week, and then we would like visit orphanages.
Mhm.
And I think the thing that I realized from that is seeing, you have these orphanage visits, right? And you have all of these people coming in and out of these kids' lives, but they don't really have this sustainable, like long-term presence.
Yeah.
It's just people dropping in and then leaving forever.
Right.
And it's in Belize, the kids can't get adopted. Like there was something,
The
or that's
laws.
yeah,
Yes.
that's what one of the
Mhm.
kids were telling me, that the law is like they can't get adopted because the
Yes.
parents can take them
Right.
back anytime. So
Yep.
they're in these homes that are, not the most well kept, and and you just got this constant cycle of people just circling through. And I'm thinking, this can't be a good thing. Like
Right.
it's probably not a terrible thing, but it
Yeah.
can't be the best situation for these
I know.
children.
Yeah. Yeah. The other side of the coin being, like, you and I don't know the long-term net gain or loss.
Right.
Because God does work in crazy ways. I mean, I was talking to a guy one time who I was like mid making fun of televangelists, and he said, I got saved by a televangelist when I was in prison. And I was like, huh.
Yeah.
I was like in the middle of me. So, I mean, God will do his thing. But I do think it's best to take stock of the factors that we can control, the variables that we can control in the equation. To do it best, to do it like the most culturally appropriate, reproducibility and sustainability being two big standards that we should use.
Yeah. Well, very cool.
I don't know. I have a lot of stories about it.
Did you want to share any?
Yeah, sure. Well, I was thinking in the realm of like community development, which is what my teammates are doing a cashew farm in West Africa. And in researching to decide to do the cashew farm, they've done a lot of reading about just community development in general. And, Africa is it's a continent. I don't mean to reduce it or simplify it, but in general, like billions of dollars have been thrown at Africa over the decades. And we're not seeing that long-term change. And so just this idea of what does good versus what makes us feel good as rich Westerners. And people come in and bring these mosquito nets, or these mosquito nets is such a huge example. I'll just go there and start.
Okay.
They get these free mosquito nets that, for malaria prevention. And these workers who are getting paid come out and give these mandatory little talks about malaria prevention, and the people listen because that's what you do to get your free thing. And then they get their free netting, and a lot of that netting ends up used as garden fencing for their gardens, because for some reason the goats like see the netting and they won't go in, and they won't cross the netting, and goats are a huge problem as far as gardening. So that's just kind of like a prime example. Another good anecdote I can give to drive this point home is I drive across the country to get to the Capitol. It's a 2-day drive, and part of the drive, a stop, is there's a village, and then there's this huge parking lot, open space, which you never see in West Africa. It's a smooth, I can't remember if it's gravel or cemented lot. And we asked somebody, we're like, are they gonna what is that? Because to us, it looks like a parking lot, which you never see.
Yeah.
And we heard the story of, I can't remember, some European non-governmental organization came in and I don't know if I'm going to get the story completely right. I think they did go ahead and ask the village, like, what is it that you want or what is it that you need, which you should do. Like, that's what you should do is um, ask, you
Yeah.
know,
Work with them. Yeah.
community involvement, community led. Um, and I think the villagers did say, like, oh, I know. Maybe they didn't even ask the village. They saw that the village was putting their market day. Every village has a market day with their big market day. And on market day, the village would set up their market on the road. So it was such a headache for traffic because it's just stopped because there's just market on the road. So I think the NGO just assumed or talked to the wrong people or something. They're like, well, obviously they need a place for their market.
Yeah.
So they built this huge lot. The villagers didn't like that. They didn't like that for whatever reason. I don't know if it was for spite. So that lot literally just sits there. The village still does their market on the road as originally intended or as originally done. And, probably that NGO left feeling good because, there's no accountability. There's no checking back in. So I'm sorry, I've kind of wandered from missions to community development. They're tied, but they're not the same. But a lot of those
Yeah.
principles work together
Yeah.
and are the same. Um, yeah, this idea of talking to people, seeing what they see as the main problem or issue. There's a thing called community health evangelism that talks a lot about this. And I remember having a conversation. I was in a class with other African pastors, and like step one is like ask the community what they want. And one of the pastors was like, well, what if they say they want a new mosque? Like, what if they decide that's what they want? And we were all like, huh. Like, it's a good question, but that's it's going to get messy when you're involving people, but that's kind of the whole point.
Yeah. 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 That's really interesting. Like that's a whole aspect too, that the whole mosque thing of like, yeah, what if they ask for something that like,
Right.
well, and I had a similar situation when I did some like, we did some like work with, in downtown Phoenix with like the homeless, trying to
Mm-hmm.
help the homeless community in downtown. And the pastor who was sort of leading the little like mission thing we were doing was asked one of the people like, what do you guys need? And they're like, honestly, condoms. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. Like, and that's one of those things where
Right.
I think a lot of churches would not do
Right.
that. They don't want to give condoms, but in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways it could prevent a lot
Yeah.
of disease.
Yeah.
So it's one of those weird things. It's like, how do you handle that when they ask something that you don't want to give? Or
Right. You're like, thank you for introducing this ethical dilemma to me now. We did, we went out, Brittany and I went out to a village like 15 minutes out of our town. And our area is interesting because they're fairly exposed to the West because a lot of them were refugees from the Liberian Civil War 25, 30 years ago, and have had more exposure to the West because they or their relatives got green cards from the UN as
Okay.
refugees. And so they have cousins or brothers or uncles or whatever in Europe and North America and Australia. And they maybe they think they have an idea or they have an idea of how Westerners think and work. And they know that we're not on board with female circumcision. To us, that's an evil. That's a societal evil. Whereas to them, it's not, or, depending on who you talk to. So they just don't talk. My neighbors that I live around just don't talk about it with me. Go out to this village, like 15 kilometers or whatever. And we went, I think it was a surprise visit, and they were doing a 40-day celebration of the girls in the village having been circumcised. And it's a rite of passage. It's a party. The girls are getting candy and like being celebrated, and the old women are dancing, and everybody's happy, and they're telling us about it. And they're like, we have another one coming up maybe that was the 10-day, and the 40-day was coming up, and they were like, will you guys be the sponsors? And Brittany and I, is that same kind of like, because first of all, we were happy that they weren't, hiding it from us, or, they were including us in their culture.
Yeah.
But like, we were taking on this weight, whether it was real or not, of being sponsors. I think it was more just like buy the candy and supply the money,
Yeah.
But we were kind of, I think we said yes in the moment, and then we were kind of like struggling through it, and then we ended up having to leave the field like for an emergency that term, so it didn't even come up. But
Yeah.
it's another one of those, when you get people involved, it gets messy, and you have to make hard decisions.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. Well, yeah, that's also interesting. I kind of want to pivot now to more of like where you are now, and kind of how missions has changed as you've started to kind of step into the world of Orthodoxy. And I know that you're just learning and don't want to be seen as an expert, but I'd love to kind of just hear your personal experience of how that's sort of shifting and changing, moving from this non-denom Protestant mindset to a more traditional Orthodox one.
Yeah. Because, well, like Cassidy, you and I met on a Discord server, Bridges of Meaning, where there are Catholic people, there are Orthodox people, there are atheists, there are lots of Protestant people. And so I've been on there for a little over a year, and meeting these Catholic and Orthodox people really shifted my mindset, because I had a super low resolution view of Catholicism, and I had basically no view at all of Orthodoxy because I hadn't heard of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
But like finding these people who had a lot of wisdom, and I could, just were mature believers, um, and listening to Paul Vanderklay's talks with different uh, different people who were, Catholic or Orthodox, just I started really thinking about several issues, and it was leading me to a place of just really, it's about someone's relationship with God, and within Christianity, becoming, I feel like, more curious or open to these older, more rooted traditions, expressions of Christianity. And so as far as with missions, it's kind of like this big ball of rubber bands, because I was having, as a female single missionary, I was having some struggles with gender roles and authority. Not like I was having authority, problems with someone, just kind of these like coherency issues of like, okay, like I'm sent overseas to preach the gospel to men and women, and then I come back and I don't want to, but if I wanted to preach to men in my more traditional upbringing, like that, that would not happen. And again, I don't want to. I'm just saying, like, coherency, consistency.
Yeah.
That was something. Sorry, I'm kind of, as far as missions, I got to stay on track here.
No, it's okay. Go wherever you feel.
Yeah.
I'm interested in hearing this.
Right. Well, their missions within Orthodoxy was and still is kind of it's a hard one for me.
What would you say,
guess,
what would you say, like, the position for people who don't know, like, of Orthodoxy and missions is, how does it differ from like maybe a Protestant tradition that you grew up in?
well, I'm not sure that I can give a definitive answer. I just, from what I see and what I've heard, there's less, sending just, I'll say random people, sending random people out to evangelize. And I think that has to do with the Orthodox history of like for a long time, the way that they preserved the faith was staying alive and keeping the faith alive. Um, that was their number one priority. Like they were under like oppression, and um, but the thing that helps me in this is that I haven't talked to a single Orthodox person who hasn't said like, yeah, this is something we need to and we're going to be working on in the years to come.
Yeah.
Um, so, but that I think because there is more of that built-in reverence for God, I find in Orthodoxy there's less of this, I would say kind of unhealthy in my experience sense of it's on me.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll be honest, like 6 months even ago when, an Orthodox or Catholic person would say something like that to me, I would just uncharitably translate that as a cop out. Um, but I don't anymore.
Yeah.
Because it's comforting to see how small I am in comparison to God, and how powerful he is to do his will.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we're in similar boats here where we've both found an affinity for Orthodoxy, or like a pull towards it. And you're probably farther along than I am, because I haven't started the official conversion process. I'm just still in sort of a exploration phase without fully committing. I'm just trying to, that's very, I think that's a part of that is just the Orthodox perspective of take your time, like the
Yeah,
church is always
right.
here. And so
Mhm.
I get that same feeling of that. There's less of this urgency, and I think in a lot of ways it's a healthy way of this send people out, go, 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 like kind of manic energy that I think sometimes manifests itself
Yes.
in
Yes.
evangelical Protestantism. And it was one of the things that I realized was, you know, I think it's one of the big things that drew me to Orthodoxy, because I was realizing, as much as there's a part of me that loved that evangelical spirit that
Mhm.
lied within those traditions, it was really pulling me down and driving me crazy.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so I definitely hear you on that perspective. I could see how it could be this difficult transition, being like, this is what I've known and this has been my life, and now here this tradition has less of an emphasis on that, and how do I put that in my categories?
Right. Exactly. Yes. Yes. And just kind of like what you were saying and what I was saying earlier about the standards of reproducibility and sustainability, um, in my eyes, something else, that drew me towards Orthodoxy was, I really tried hard not to bring in my American evangelicalism to West Africa. The goal was to bring in the scriptures and to let um, West Africans read the scriptures and decide how to act those out within their culture. But I mean, I always got questions about, like, okay, it's Ramadan now, do I fast? And I would say, that's not my call to make. I'm not you, and I'm not in your culture, and look at the Bible and we can talk about things, but you get to decide. And or like they had parts of the scripture, but they were like, well, now, so what do we do? When are the prayer times? How do we live this out, basically?
Yeah.
And I it was hard for me because I did see that just having the Bible isn't going to be enough. Like, first of all, it's not a literate culture. So they're used to listening to their imam tell them what to do and them doing it, and not reading something, a sacred, like, a holy text for themselves, and thinking about how to interpret it or what to do. And I actually kind of saw how more in line with the human spirit that can be, and like the disciplines involved in Islam, and the prayer times, discipline and the reverence for God. Like I came to see how and even like the liturgical year, the liturgical calendar, the liturgical day, everything is soaked in what they think about God. They turn their day around what they think about God, and they make room for him within it. And I did see how that made so much sense. And within Orthodoxy, there are those things. Bonus, it's rooted in Christ, you know.
Yeah.
That was kind of irreverent. It makes sense because Orthodoxy is early Christianity, and Islam peeled off from early Christianity. So it was almost like I'll stop there. I'll stop there. I feel like I was
Yeah.
going to go a little over the line. So that was another thing that I found as I was exploring Orthodoxy. It wasn't like I went to Orthodoxy because I couldn't have articulated those things, but I was like realizing it as I go now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it fits in more. And just this idea that I feel like within Orthodoxy, there's just like a knowledge of how weak humanity is, and like that's why we have these physical reminders, or physical reminders, and embodying your faith. It's funny because in the language that I was translating into, they talk about there's less of this sin. There's a sin word, but a lot of it is worded in they forgot. They forgot God, or they forgot what the right thing to do was. They forgot the straight path. And I always had a problem with that coming from the West. I'm like, no, just admit it. You're wrong. You're guilty. You sin. But within their day, like those physical reminders of God are there. So like forgetting God does equal sin. Like it's a different way of looking at it. But again, to me, it does make more sense when as you see how sick mankind is with sin. So that was another thing that changed in my perspective.
Yeah. And so as you've been making this journey to Orthodoxy and starting your conversion, how has it been engaging with people who used to know you as this Protestant missionary? Has there been a lot of like struggle with that, or how have people taken it?
Yeah, I'm right in the thick of that. I am right in the middle of contacting people who have supported me financially for the last 10 years. And, COVID makes things a little weird. We've either been doing Zoom or some in person, where I wanted to tell them face to face before I sent out just this kind of more general email to everyone. And I've met with pastors of some of my churches. And overall, it's funny because it's what I expected. Like people are happy when I start out with like, basically I just want to be a wife and a mom. They're like, oh, that's so great. Da 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 da. We're so happy. Like we were wondering, we're getting worried. Like there's that. And then, but then I make a decision in my head, depending on whom I'm talking to, if I'm going to go into the Orthodoxy thing, because like, I talked to my priest about this, and I was kind of like worried about it. And he said, when you come into the church, he's like, first of all, you're not even part of this was before I was a catechumen. He's like, you're not even part of the church yet. And when you do come in the church, you become a baby again. And we don't expect babies to defend Orthodoxy. It's not your job. Like, who said it was their business anyway? So I do make a conscious decision of if I'm even going to go there. It's money makes things complicated. So I'm like, are they going to think I, cut and run type thing? Like I've been supported for 10 years and now I'm going to, but I just decide what my relationship with this person is. And like, if I want to go into it. And honestly, most of the time I have gone into it, and like I said earlier, most people don't even know enough about Orthodoxy to give me, any solid feedback or pushback or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and then the few that have, I've had a couple spicier conversations, I would say, but I'm really trying to, take my priest advice and just like, it's hard because I'm so Protestant at heart. I want to convert them right there. I want to convert the person I'm talking to right there. But it's just not, it's not my job right now. My job is to, figure out my inner life. And so I'd say overall going well, but not without the occasional spicy conversation.
Yeah. Well, and you brought up something that I wanted to ask you about too, and I don't expect like hard answer. Like it's okay if you're uncertain and just going from your own perspective. But why do you think that in Protestant circles, Orthodoxy isn't really talked about? Because I had the same experience of, getting, through Paul Vanderklay's channel and through the Discord, meeting a bunch of Orthodox people and realizing, hold on a second, I don't actually know what Orthodoxy is. I know Catholicism. I know, what Mormonism is and all these other sort of
Right.
these other brands of like kind of Christian, kind of different. And like, depending on which Protestant church you're in, Catholicism can either be there are brothers in Christ and we need to find a way to bridge it, or they're like, they're not saved. So it's just this weird battle with Catholicism, but Orthodoxy is just off the table.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know if it's just like a sheer numbers thing. I know, so I'm in Oklahoma. I don't know. I say that though, but there's like 3 or 4 churches in the Tulsa area. So I'm not sure, I've heard it talked about that, like Orthodoxy did come as it wasn't a missionary movement to come to America. It was just refugees from Europe coming over to stay alive or have a better life. So they weren't out to necessarily like bring more people into the church. That's like a broad statement, but that's kind of what I've heard. They were more like, the Greeks stay with the Greeks and continue their way of life and their culture. And so less, proselytizing, less looking out and more inward focused. And I think that there's so much good to be had in there, but I do think maybe that's one reason. Again, this is a point where I'm like, I don't know, ask an Orthodox person who's been working at the church longer than I have.
Yeah. I mean, I just asked because I've been struggling with that too, of like, what is it about like growing up in Protestantism? Why is it that I've never heard about this? What is it about that culture that ignores this piece of the pie? I remember before I really started getting like the seeds of like genuine interest of it, the only exposure that I had had is in some like apologetics book that did like comparative religion, and it was like 1.5 pages on like Orthodoxy. And I'm like, that is not sufficient for the depth of what this is, and like learning that now. But I just it just baffles me, and I don't quite understand it.
I know, same, because I remember like a college minister, like somebody I worked with when I was in university on a college campus, became Catholic, and I was getting ready to talk to him and just like try to understand what was happening. And my friend who had been to seminary was like, well, Shelly, ask him why he didn't become Orthodox. Why did he choose Catholicism? And I was like, I don't even know enough about Orthodoxy to know why you're asking me to ask this question.
Yeah.
So, yes, like no exposure at all. And I don't know if it's just like that, the othering thing where we're just like, oh, it's like Catholicism. We're not even, because, you mentioned depending on what church you come from, how Catholics are viewed. I feel like my upbringing, Catholics, it was just, I had like, like a 2-sentence kind of negative definition of Catholicism. And that's what I worked with for like 30 years. And I mean, part of that's on me because I didn't take the time to learn. And so that's something I would change in my upbringing if I could, but I can, and it can't, and it's going to be okay. But it definitely, went a long time not knowing a lot. And
Yeah, it's
yeah.
it's funny. I've been doing streaming for a church, a Protestant church, the one that I kind of grew up in and like kind of solidified a Christian faith in. And they were doing this whole series about like crucial questions, of like people asking questions about like Christianity and like, the tough ones. And they did the whole thing of like, how do we know the difference between like religions? And so they talked about a little bit about Mormonism and a little bit about Islam and a little bit about Catholicism and Protestantism, and spent time there, but like Orthodoxy not mentioned. And I was like, what about that? Like, what's your perspective on that? Like, why are we ignoring it? And just, I don't know, it's one of those questions that I'm really trying to like unpack, like what is it about that Protestant culture that doesn't talk about that? And like when the Orthodox church that I've been going to has a lot of converts, and a lot of them are Catholic. And I wonder in some ways if that move from Catholicism to Orthodoxy is easier because of the style of worship with the liturgy. But there's also like, there's this one girl who was an atheist, who was in the conversion process, and she grew up Mormon, and then she was like just trying out different churches and stuff with her friends, and when she got to Orthodoxy, there was something in it that made it switch, and so she's converting too. So I don't know if there's like a pattern of who's converting to Orthodoxy or not, but it does make me kind of wonder, like, is there something to that Catholicism that makes it an easier transition?
I don't know. Because as far as like liturgical traditions, I know I've heard and I've read that like people coming out of Anglicanism into Orthodoxy, that's like the most overlap. There's a lot of overlap there too, as far as liturgy.
Yeah.
And on the more conservative side, it's like the opening line, and I think it's the opening line in the Orthodox Way that I'm like working through slowly. It says something like, all Protestants are crypto-papists. So basically saying, I'm sure you've heard this, like, yeah, in my head, especially at the beginning, Catholicism and Orthodoxy looked more similar to each other than Protestantism. And in the Orthodox mind, Catholicism and Protestantism are more similar to each other than to Orthodoxy. So I think I'm not sure about I was actually talking to someone who was Catholic who became Orthodox last Sunday, and it was pretty interesting because, you and I can probably hammer out like the top 10 Protestant obstacles to Orthodoxy just because that's what we know and we do. And his were not all the same. I mean, I think maybe there were some that he had different ones.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's hard to say.
Well, I mean, there's one thing that's like, maybe that makes it easier, because I think sometimes I'm baffled why I'm interested in Orthodoxy, because the whole like high church liturgical thing was always something, for a long time, was something that did not resonate with me. I could not connect with, and now all of a sudden it's like become this thing that's so life-giving to me. And I'm like, I don't know what's happening, but we'll just embrace it and go forward with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I always wonder sometimes, because I've told a couple people too about me wanting to go Orthodox, and one of my mentors was talking to me. He's like, it doesn't really surprise me. I think there's a lot of people who grew up in sort of this non-denominational mushy church who want more structure and want more reverence, and so they move towards more high church services. So I don't know. I mean, I definitely don't know enough. It's just interesting to kind of like think about it. And
well, and I agree with that statement that you just said, your friend said, but like it also, I feel like it kind of like in my head cheapens it because it's not just high church services. It's like, it's
Right.
a whole different mindset.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree with you there. I don't want to belittle what
Yeah.
it is.
Right.
Yeah.
I know. Well, it's funny because as I grow into it, it makes more and more sense that I would be, because I've lived in the East for 8 years. That freneticism of the West, um, it became more apparent to me coming in, and when I did decide to stay in America again, I always I had begun to suspect that if I did live in America again, I wasn't sure that I could do evangelicalism. And
Yeah.
it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with mission slash community development of the standards of sustainability and reproducibility. And I think it was in, I can't remember where I heard this, but like the standard life cycle of a Protestant church, or yeah, I think of a Protestant church is like 60 years. Just of a given one. And, you know, of course, there's exceptions to the rule, but in general, and probably especially in evangelicalism, 60 years is probably on the long side. But
Yeah.
and then, you know, compare that with Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And also, you know, living in West Africa and realizing, okay, we're going to get the Bible translated eventually, and you know, I just had this hope that, and then boom, there will be a church and they'll know how to do things, and it'll be culturally appropriate, and then it'll be biblical, and like, well, okay, what is even biblically, you know, what does biblical mean within the context? I don't want to be the interpreter of the scripture. I don't want to interpret the text for them. It's not my culture. And just seeing how having a church to help to inform the scripture is a good thing. And I never would have said that even 6 months ago. You know,
Yeah.
that was a huge one for me, being in Bible translation, as far as the importance of scripture, and realizing the Orthodox do place a great importance on scripture. It's the individual, anyone can interpret scripture the way they see fit, that they reject.
Yeah. Which
So
to me makes sense, right? Like,
yeah.
And that was always something that I had kind of, I mean, even in my Protestant circle, that's something that I had come to a conclusion of like, yeah, I can interpret this however I want, but it doesn't mean that interpretation is correct. And I'd like to know what the text is actually meant to be, and like the correct interpretation, which sometimes gets a little foggy in all of the mush of what is like all of like the schisms of Protestantism and the different denominations. So it's a tricky minefield to like weave in.
Oh my gosh. Well, and I'll tell you, I don't know. I look back the last decade and I see how it's been moving me toward this point. My first home assignment back, I was really dealing with these gender role questions. And I went to my college church that I went to in college. They grew me a lot, you know?
Yeah.
And asked a pastor who you know, he's a spiritual father for me. And I was like, yeah, just going through these confusions that I was having. I think I mentioned earlier, like overseas, I'm kind of seen as a pastor, but here I'm not. And, you know, it was also like the time when complementarianism was really being pushed. And I was just like, I don't know where I fit. So we were having that conversation, and he kind of was like, you know, I don't think in the context of genders and being married, he was like, I'm not sure that God will ever say, you know, you were too submissive, which I think was a poor choice of words for him, because I know that's not, he didn't mean it. It sounds like it's like a door opening for abuse or something. I don't think that's what he meant. But ironically, like that really just pushed me more towards a Catholic and apostolic church. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I need a, if I'm going to submit, I need a body that's been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
Like, and, even conversations on the Discord when the Orthodox or Catholic people would say, like, I submit to the authority of the church on this issue as a, this good rogue Protestant girl, I'd be like, oh, cop out, like, but now I'm just like, no, it's beautiful to submit. And like people have been working on these tough issues for the last, 2000 years or so. And I'm not smarter than them. I know that,
Yeah. Well, yeah,
So,
that speaking of words that fudge, to bookend this, submission is one of those words, and we can go into a whole long conversation about that. But I think with the way that feminism has developed and what it is, people have different baggage with that. So yeah,
sure.
I can understand what you mean, but I also see how that word can just trigger people in a way that it's not meant to.
Definitely.
But
Definitely.
yeah, but yeah, this has been really great. Are there any last thoughts that you have? Anything that you want to say and didn't get a chance to before we wrap up?
No, I can't think of anything really.
I think we covered a lot.
You're-
Yeah.
I feel like
No.
I talked a lot.
No, it's great. I loved it. I love hearing your perspective, and I think you said so many things that really get to the core of what I want to do with this anyways, with like how do we unpack some of these things that we think we know, and changing our perspective and our minds, and giving a little personal understanding of the orthodoxy and that transition, because I think it's hard to admit when you've changed your mind on something, and like it's uncomfortable. And I'm always so fascinated by the people who make that choice, especially when it goes in the face of something that would kind of hurt their reputation, or create a different change. And I feel like in some ways you're in that boat with the way that you've lived your life with the missions. And now I don't think it's a huge pivot or like a deconstruction and like I'm letting go of my faith, but I could see how a lot of people could take that in a way that's different. So I think there is something to your transition that is interesting and has some stake to it,
Thank you. Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right, because I don't see it as a deconstruction of my faith, but I do. People who love me and support me and could see it that way.
Yeah.
And do. So yeah, just it kind of this conversation is urging me to have better conversations with them. I think it's just going to take time and patience and good communication.
Yeah, that's it. That's all you can do. Well, thanks again,
Yeah.
Shelly. It's been so good.
Thanks. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I definitely had a lot of fun having it. Shelly did mention a book while we were talking called When Helping Hurts. If you're interested in checking that out, I put a link in the description for you. Otherwise, that's all I have for you today. So I will end with serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you.